Hello, everybody. There are just a couple things that I wanted to talk about since we just got finished talking about trig and graphing trigonometric functions, using a lot of sines and cosines. There's a couple things I wanted to wrap up before we start talking about things next week. I'm getting getting you all ready for the EOC. So first, let's talk about domain and range. This is more, I want to remind you about domain and range, and I also want to talk about it in terms of trig. So when we talk about domain and range, remember that domain refers to the x, okay? So that refers to how far and how far left and how far right a function goes. And range refers to the y, so how far down and how far up a function goes. So for a lot of the functions we talked about, like a line, both of these are usually infinite, but sometimes we have some limits, like the range on just a regular parabola. It has a point where it stops, so everything above that point, it goes on infinite, but it has a point where it actually starts. So sometimes we have things that go on for infinity, sometimes we have things that have limits on them. Now, when we talk about domain and range in terms of trig, things get a little bit different. So for the domain for sine of x and cosine of x, so just those basic functions with normal angles, is from negative infinity to infinity. And remember in interval notation that looks like this. Remember that parentheses mean that it does not include negative infinity and infinity. And that's only because we can't actually put a point on negative infinity or infinity, because infinity is not really a number, it's more of an idea. It's somewhere where we're headed, but not an actual destination we can get to. So they go on for forever in the x direction in both directions. Now the range is different, and that should be a y, not an x in my interval here. It's from -1 to +1. Okay, so remember, if you looked at the graph for sine of x and cosine of x, it only went up and down so far. So for basic functions, they only go up to +1 and down to -1. They don't go any farther unless there's been something that's been done to its amplitude. Okay, and that's how it looks in interval notation. Okay, now one more thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about the unit circle. I kind of touched upon this a little bit yesterday. Didn't really go into detail about it, but I want to talk about it a little bit more specifically now. Okay, in front of you, you have a unit circle, blank unit circle. So I want you to go ahead and start to fill that out as I talk about it. So this is the unit circle. So the unit circle revolves around the idea is that we have this circle that is has a radius that is a unit. A unit is just 1. So it has a radius that is 1. So it goes from 1 over here to -1 in the x, and 1 to -1 in the y. And then you can see all the degrees. So from 0, it goes all the way around to 90, straight up and down, to 180, to 270, to 360 right here. So this is a unit circle. The reason why I wanted to show you this is because sometimes we have some trig functions that are very common. So the trig solutions for the angles like 30, 45, 60, 90, so on, are well known enough that sometimes people have them memorized. Like when I was in school, they had us memorize all of these so that if we saw them, we could do them without a calculator very quickly. Now, when you go to take the EOC, there will be some answers that are probably written in these forms, like the square root of 2 over 2 and the square root of 3 over 2, and so on and so on. But what I want to make you aware of is that while you may not have these memorized, which is fine, you can still figure out the answers of those common trig functions simply using your calculator. So when you do like the sine or cosine of 30, for instance. So if you notice up here at the top, it says cosine and sine and puts them in parentheses like this. So that's saying that the x function, the x coordinates here are cosine solutions, and the y is our sine solution. And tangent is the sine divided by the cosine. But if you do this, let's say the sine of 30, that's our y, it's 1/2. Now, if you get an answer that's 0.5, you know that's the same as 1/2. But that you wouldn't get 0.5 in your calculator, which is fine. You type the tangent or the sine of 30, you get 1/2, and it's all good. Now, if you did the cosine of 30 and you got a decimal, and you're not really sure what the answer is because they're all in radicals. Now, if you just go through your multiple choice questions and try different solutions, and then come across radical 3 over 2, type that into your calculator, and it comes out to be the same thing as the decimal that you got for your cosine of 30, then you're good. So while you may not have these memorized, and while the answers on the EOC may be written like this, you can still figure them out. That's the whole point of this. So copy this down and have this, and just so that you've seen it, you know what it looks like, and you're ready to go. And just FYI, like I said, I've mentioned yesterday, these pies with the numbers underneath and things like that, those are radians. It's just another way to measure an angle. So 90 degrees is the same as pi over 2. Pi is the same as 180. 2 pi is the same as 360. Things like that. All right, that's it. Hope you have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend.